The world is full of willing people. Some willing to work, the rest willing to let them. Robert Frost. Do you ever feel like you're not getting a big enough piece of the proverbial pie? But then when you look around, you're also the one holding the biggest plate compared to everybody else? There's a pattern that's easy to fall into, but much harder to admit. It's where your life becomes more about what you're taking from the world rather than what you're putting back into it. Think about it. Are you the first person to raise your hand and say, yes, I want that, but the last one to say, hey, how can I help? Maybe you've noticed that before you commit to anything, whether it's a project at work, a favor for a friend, or even just showing up for family, your first thought is always, what am I going to get for this? Granted, we all want good things. We all have high expectations for our lives and who we want to be. But there can be a disconnect when we expect life or the people around us to hand us everything while we're not actually putting in the real work to make our environment better. It's like expecting a fire to keep you warm without knowing how to light it, or ever throwing a log on it to keep it lit. However, none of us intentionally become takers. It's just that life gets busy. And little by little, we stop noticing what we're taking from the people and what's going on around us. And one of the easiest things to lose track of isn't whether you're working hard. It's whether you're putting enough back in to deserve what you keep expecting out. And one of the reasons that this topic is uncomfortable is because we don't like to identify with it. When we think of someone who takes more than they put in, we picture somebody else. Someone who's entitled, demanding, self-centered. The person who never helps, never shows appreciation, and always makes everything about themselves. But that's usually not how it shows up. Most of the time, it looks normal. It looks like you're tired, like you're stressed, like you're feeling overlooked, or like you're saying to yourself, I've been carrying a lot lately. And in many instances, it's probably true. But there's a difference between carrying a lot and becoming so focused on what you need that you stop noticing what everyone else is carrying as well. That's the part that's difficult to acknowledge. Because if you ask anyone, hey, do you contribute? Most people would say yes. But if you ask different questions, such as, are you first to offer support, or do you mostly wait for it? Do you make life easier for people around you? Do you check in with others, or mostly prefer people to check on you? Do you leave places better, or are you more focused on how they serve your needs? Those questions have a different impact. Now, this isn't about becoming selfless or pretending that your needs don't matter. We all need help from time to time. You're allowed to have those times where you receive more than you give. That's simply the cycle of being a human being. But receiving and expecting? Nope, not the same thing. An expectation can change the way you see the world. You start noticing every instance when you feel unsupported. Every opportunity you didn't get. Every person who didn't show up for you. However, we likely never stop to ask, if someone looked at my actions, would they say that I've been putting in or mostly expecting to get something first? Then another way we get tripped up is the idea that when we hear contribution, we immediately think accounting. Like every relationship becomes a spreadsheet. I did this, they did that. I gave 3 things, they gave 2. But that's not what this means. Healthy relationships don't survive because people keep perfect score. In all reality, for the most part, people are pretty generous. They'll usually give the extra time. They have the extra patience. They're usually more understanding, and they'll generally carry more than their share for a while because they care. But there's something we notice even if we never talk about it. Patterns. The people notice who always shows up to help. those who volunteer instead of being told to do something, the ones who follow through, or the ones who only seem engaged when there's something in it for them. And we do this because trust works like accumulation. Every small contribution tells other people, you can count on me. Every small withdrawal says, you can carry me. And then over time, people start responding to you accordingly. But what's interesting is they usually don't announce it. They don't sit you down and tell you that their trust in you is dropping. They just stop offering. They stop asking. They stop relying on you. And this happens at work. It happens in our friendships. It happens with our families and in our communities. People naturally move toward people who add stability, but engage cautiously around people who mostly consume it. Because most people are more apt to remember the person who consistently puts something back into the situation than takes something out. However, there's another aspect to this, similar to the accounting mindset. When we hear the phrase, taking more than you're putting in, our minds tend to go to money. Things like, hey, who paid? Who put more money in? Or say when you're at work, who makes more money than me? But some of the biggest withdrawals aren't anything that can be tangibly measured. You can take the room's attention. You can take their patience. You can take someone's emotional space. You can take someone's confidence, their energy, and their willingness to want to assist you. And the difficult part is, most of those things are invisible while they're happening. Think about the person who always needs the conversation to come back to them, or the person who always needs reassurance, but rarely gives it. The person who complains constantly, but contributes no solutions. The person who expects everyone's understanding of them, but gives very little of it. But again, this isn't about never needing people. Never needing anyone isn't real life. Sometimes you're the one who needs help. Sometimes you're that person who needs to be supported. The difference is whether your default mindset becomes being the consumer. We can all remember people who drain us, but it's harder to ask if we do that to others. Granted, not intentionally, not maliciously, but just through our habits, through being distracted around them, through becoming so occupied with our own goals, our own frustrations, pressures, or our own problems, that we stop noticing the cost of constantly putting our weight on other people's shoulders. Because contribution isn't always action. Sometimes putting something in simply means not making everyone else spend more than they should when they're around you. And here's where the split can come. Because once you start seeing yourself in aspects like this, there's a decision to make. And it's easy for you to maybe ignore it. Because if you realize you've been expecting more than you've been contributing, the first reaction can usually be defensive. You start building in your explanations. I've had a lot going on. I've been handling a lot more than people realize. No one really appreciates all that I do. And like I said, some of those things can be completely true, which is what makes this difficult. Because real life doesn't always play nice. We go through periods of our life where we're stretched thin, disappointed with how things are, distracted by things within and out of our control. There's times we withdraw because we're hurting, not because we're selfish. But explanation and exemption aren't the same thing. Understanding why something happened doesn't automatically mean it shouldn't change. And that's where shame can sneak in. We'll tell ourselves, if I've been getting things wrong, then it must be because maybe I'm the selfish one. Maybe I'm one of those people. Basically, I'm the problem. But that's usually not what's happening. In most instances, we don't choose to take, but we're adapting to our pressures. The problem is, adaptation doesn't always produce good habits. Sometimes it produces blind spots. And blind spots don't get fixed by guilt. They get fixed by noticing. by being willing to acknowledge something that can be difficult. There may be places where you've stopped putting in what you expect to get back because you can't adjust something you refuse to look at. So then, if that recognition happens, if you start seeing the places where maybe you've been expecting more than you've been putting in, then what? The answer isn't to make promises. It's not about creating some new rule where you now have to overperform or become the person who carries everyone else, because that usually doesn't last. And honestly, that's still centered on outcomes. It's still you wondering, what do I need to do so I can get a different result? The better way to address things is to look inside yourself. You need to determine who you want to become, because people who consistently contribute don't usually wake up calculating their contribution. They're not asking if today's effort gets rewarded. They just see themselves differently. They become the kind of person who notices others, who carries their part, who leaves a situation better than it was. And that identity starts making decisions for them. They help because that's simply who they are. They give attention because that's who they are, not because they expect anything in return. Now, doing that doesn't mean life suddenly becomes fair. There are people who contribute and still get overlooked. There are people who give and don't get much back. That unfortunately is life. But contribution changes something regardless. It changes your relationship with yourself. And maybe that's the subtle shift underneath all this. Not asking, what am I getting? But becoming someone who, more often than not, leaves more behind than they take with them. This isn't one of those topics where you walk away and suddenly change everything tomorrow. That's definitely not how real change works most of the time. Usually, it starts small. Having those more personal conversations. Those changes in habits that remain consistent. When you catch yourself trying to understand before needing to be understood. When you appreciate while you wait to be appreciated. And when you don't wait for somebody else to try and make things better. And maybe when you do this, nothing immediately dramatic happens. But most important, now you're seeing it. And once you see it, it's easier to ignore what you used to do. To be clear, what most of us consider fulfillment might actually be closer to usefulness than achievement. Not usefulness in the sense of productivity, but just knowing that your presence has value, that those around you trust you, that people don't feel less or alone after being around you. Making those changes doesn't require you to get it right immediately. It simply requires a little more effort and a little more awareness. Because it isn't about becoming someone who never needs anything. It's just that you strive to be the person that wherever life puts you, the people and the environments carry less of your weight and you try to take on more of theirs. As always, thanks for spending a few minutes with me. Until next time, stay sharp, stay grounded, and keep showing up.